And this morning, we're also happy to have the young founder of the Trust the Badge podcast with us. And Jasur Talipov joins us now. He is a senior at Trinity Prep. Jasur, good to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk about Trust the Badge. You're a senior at Trinity Prep, and this is something that you got interested in. How did you start that you decided this is what I want to focus on?
So I was inspired by Trust the Badge by volunteering at my local police station. So just for some background context, the Altamont Springs Police Station is actually inside of the Altamont Mall. And it's right next to the entrance and exit. So that being said, you get to see a lot of the community through the windows.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times when I volunteered there, I usually saw two main reactions when someone would see the police station. One, they would either see it and immediately walk past the police station so they wouldn't be seen by police, or they would just turn around, go through the exit, and go through another entrance to the mall, just so they don't be seen by the police. And of course, there are those who just mind their own business, but most of the time, I saw the distrust of people in that mall. So I made it my mission to really fix this problem, because it's not just a one-time thing, it's generational. So after I saw that, I created Trust the Badge, I created the podcast, and I got my first interview of Chief Riggs of the Altamont Springs Police Department, who's helped me so far.
Which is amazing. And we want to talk about the media role, we want to talk about all those things, but when you talk about the trust, I looked at a Quinnipiac poll recently, 62% said that they trust police to do the right thing, but on the other side of that, 36% said they don't. I'm sure you're probably not surprised by those numbers.
I'm actually not surprised, and it is very unfortunate. What I hope to accomplish is to build that trust, and throughout many of my interviews, I realized that communication is the key factor in building that trust. And most of the times in many communities, there's not a lot of communication or transparency between law enforcement and their community. So it's really important to build that sort of trust and to make more communication between those two sides.
You know, I've talked to a number of sheriffs I know about your goal here, and they're so excited about that a young person is involved in, and they'll tell you, I mean, and you know this as well, there are a lot of really good police officers, but there are some bad ones, and unfortunately those become the stories we hear about. Do you think there's maybe a miscommunication, or when you talk to people, what is the one thing they give back to you that maybe surprises you about the way they view law enforcement?
Well, when I talk to people about law enforcement, I just find it surprising that they look at one specific incident and believe that nationally all law enforcement is the same. That's not really the case. Most law enforcement, they're very good people. Really, what I'm trying to push is that all law enforcement should be represented as people who want to help the community.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. Unfortunately, there are cases where law enforcement are on the wrong side, but most of the time they're on our side.
Let's talk about the podcast. And first, let's start with when you decided you wanted to do this. It's one thing to think I should do this, but then you took the step to do it. What was the biggest challenge to set up a podcast?
My biggest challenge was, I guess, getting enough listeners and people.
Yeah.
So thankfully, with the help of the Altamont Springs Police Department Chief James Riggs, he helped me out a lot with my podcast. He's my first interview. He let the community know. He actually helped post my Trust the Badge and my podcast, my nonprofit, on their Facebook, so it could get some attraction. So I really appreciate that, and that's how I really got started. He was my first interview, then it was another person, and then someone else connecting me to another law enforcement officer. So it was just a chain of events of people connecting me to other officers.
You got a member of Congress that you spoke to as well. I mean, that's pretty good.
That was my last interview. Yes, sir.
Talk about the feedback from law enforcement. I know I've spoken to some sheriffs, but what feedback? I know you haven't done this a whole long time, but what feedback have you gotten?
I've gotten feedback. It's different, because I really try to get unique perspectives. I've gotten state troopers, I've gotten former FBI, former ATF and Secret Service, and of course the U.S. congressmen, and they really give different perspectives because they're all in these different roles. For example, the state trooper in Pennsylvania has a much better relationship with her community that I interviewed, and she's really thankful for that. Some other people that I've interviewed are not so fond of their bond with their community. Yeah. So it really does show how different places have different perspectives, and it shows how unbalanced it is.
Have you had some negative feedback? I mean, we find it in our business. Sometimes you take positions that you don't think are positions, but people are so set in their feelings that they'll react negatively. Have you seen that?
I have seen that, yes, and it really is unfortunate. My entire job is to make sure that is lessened and to make sure that we have more positivity and to build that trust between law enforcement and the community.
You're a younger generation here. Do you think that's a part of the problem when you look at that poll? Certainly a younger generation seems to maybe even trust less than an older generation does with law enforcement.
I do see that as a problem, mainly because of social media. Usually we see that there are 10-second clips of law enforcement or even less of showing them doing something in the wrong, but really they don't show the backstory on social media of what happened beforehand or what led up to that specific specific event. So I find it unfortunate that my generation has to distrust the police more than other generations, mainly because of social media. So I find that deteriorating for my generation, but I really hope to combat that by using my podcast as another network for my generation.
What's your goal moving forward? I know you want to think about maybe being an attorney, but with the podcast, with the cause, what do you want to see going forward?
I really want to have a big widespread of Trust the Badge. To be honest with you, I want to make it national. I want there to be more awareness. I want there to be more insight and just in general, just a more of a positive impact across all communities. Actually, on my websites, because of my many interviews, I've realized, as I've mentioned, there's a lack of communication between law enforcement and their communities. So I created an online forum with the Altamont Springs Police Department. What I really hope is to spread that online forum and to partner my organization with other police departments across the nation to make an online forum that their communities can use to ask questions, propose suggestions, or just leave any sort of comments or concerns to their local police department. That increases communication, and the more communication there is, the more trust there is.
That's awesome. This is your opportunity now. People are watching. What's the easiest way to find the podcast? I know you're on Instagram because I connected with you there.
Right. So you can go to www.trustthebadge.com. You can find Trust the Badge on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, basically any sort of podcast platform and music platform. So it's everywhere out there. Please take a listen and try to understand how law enforcement feels about their communities and see what you can do to make a better impact.
Well, Jasur, it is refreshing to see young people as involved as you are. So thanks for coming in. I know a lot of law enforcement says thank you for what you're doing. So thanks for coming in with us.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, great to have him on the program. Just so driven. And check his podcast out. He's got all the different versions. The latest edition he's got was the Be Sheriff Lima.